It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be invited to speak to you, coming colleagues, I hope, in the research business. I have 3 missions with my talk today. And the first mission, of course, as requested, is try to inspire you to be interested in psychiatry and psychiatric research. And psychiatric research is today a very fast expanding field. We have been a bit behind, you could say, both concerning interest and concerning resources that have been put into psychiatric research. But we are keeping up and making progress, I would say. The second mission I have is to detect that you should recognize and acknowledge epidemiology. It sounds a bit boring, it's even difficult to pronounce, but it has changed the field of psychiatric research, and especially Karolinska Institutet has been very successful with several groups who works within psychiatric epidemiology using the registries we have in Sweden, which is a great asset. The third mission is maybe a bit more vague, and maybe it's more kind of my personal thing also. It's very important to try to combine research with humanistic thinking and with ethical issues, and also with kind of personal courage. Maybe psychiatry is not so special and so different from other research fields, but still it's severe diseases which affect really the human mind, and you have to be especially careful concerning the ethical aspects in psychiatric research. The first you see here is a kind of a puzzle pieces of my own career, and I will come back to all of them in my talk. I also changed the title. I'm not sure that was allowed, the title I gave you from the beginning. But I thought what I'm in just now, and what is very important in the stage I'm now in my research, is really to try to understand both the beauty, but of course I always also have felt the hardship of trying to collect large population-based data in both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and autism. So I will touch upon that also. I had my psychology training in Uppsala. I'm a psychologist by profession, and I worked for many years in the psychiatric field. I think it's in the 60s when I started to study psychology, it was very different from today. It was very biological, I would say, a lot basic psychology training with learning, memory, cognition, and no one talked about treatment at that time. But Uppsala was at the same time very in the front, I would say, front side of developing behavioral therapy. So in the 70s, this was really an increasing field that later became cognitive behavioral therapy. This is Ulleråker Hospital in Uppsala. This is the type of old mental hospitals that we have in Sweden in many large cities. I started there in 1968, quite young, and I've never been to a mental hospital before, so it was, as you know, the hospitals at that time was very much like a small city of its own, with the patients were not allowed to be in the society in any form ever, and most of them spent most of their lives there. I remember when I told my grandfather, he was probably 80 or at that time, or 70, that I'm going to start my psychology training in Ulleråker. And then he said, "Oh no, that's a dangerous place." And I know a man, he went in there with a horse and a wagon and he never came back again. And I've laughed myself many times at that story, because I spent 35 years or so working in that hospital before I came to Karolinska. So I was probably more institutionalized, or as institutionalized as many of the patients. It was the psychiatric how you perceive the etiology of psychiatric problems when I started there was, of course, very biological, very psychodynamic also, and they started day treatment, which was and group therapy, which was a start for many of the new things that we are working with today. The first thesis in psychiatry was 1853. That was a long time ago, and by chance I just saw the title the other day, and the title of the first PhD thesis, 1858, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. It was Bidrag till den psykiska etiologin, Contribution to the Etiology of Psychic Disorders. And we are still on that track. I mean, you can still say that in psychiatric research we are still looking for major influence etiological risk factors for the severe diseases, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and autism. And I think we have a long way to go also to come to a stage where we can find biomarkers and in many other parts of medicine. I took this picture. This is Gustav Fröding, and he was a patient at Ulleråkers Hospital in 1898, I think, until 1905. And of course he had a special, there was first class treatment and second class treatment, and Gustav Fröding has a first class, so he had a nurse. He could go walking in the park, very nice park there. And it's his text, what he has written, has the last year really been, you can hear them everywhere with the pop group. Vad heter de? Mando Diao, just there. So this is one of his texts that Mando Diao also is using now. This is very much my own path. From being both a psychologist, a psychotherapist, with a dynamic, more knowledge base to more genetic research, which I've done the last maybe almost 9 years. This is the Broad Institute and the genetic lab. And we have now a large collaboration with Broad Institute, so we have taken this field until genetic risk factors. My first research field was more towards the psychological parts. For instance, a student of mine studied what do siblings to schizophrenic patients, what is their thinking about having a sibling with schizophrenia. So I also made many qualitative studies where you interview the siblings. And you can see this study was maybe 20 siblings to schizophrenic patients. And they expressed a lot of strong feelings of love, but also of sorrow, of course, of shame and what have we done in our family to have this severe disease, but also a lot of normalizing and caring. And one thing that was very obvious and that I think it's important now when I'm doing genetic research is that, of course, almost everyone has thinking about how heritable is this disease? Will it affect my children? I think that we have been not so brave as personnel in psychiatric research to really take up those questions. We have maybe we didn't have estimates that have been good enough, but it's about time to also face those questions about the recurrence risk in siblings and in children, and what happens if you have two parents with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And that's the type of research we have done. My first interest and still my interest is how will complication during the prenatal period affect the development of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and many other psychiatric diseases. And this is what's called pooled odds ratio. That means that you have about a twofold risk to develop schizophrenia if you have complication during the pre and perinatal period. I started with just patients around me at Ulleråkers sjukhus that came visiting the hospital during 2 years, and it took me quite a long time. It took me probably 3 years to collect a sample of 107 schizophrenia patients, and we had a control group of persons that were born in the same delivery series. So here you can see that if you have 7 complications or more, there is a 4-fold increased risk in schizophrenia. Later, and with larger material, you don't need to collapse complication or variables into scales that you can look at individual complications and estimate the increased risk. And so I've done several studies where you can show that the risk of developing schizophrenia is associated with both born, small for gestational age, a low birth weight, fetal growth restriction, preterm birth, and small head circumference, and also a low APGAR score, likely indicating the asphyxia. And we don't have really good answer. What is the mediating factors? Of course, you can know that this is non-optimal for the child, but it's very difficult to see still how this is related to schizophrenia, and if there is genetic risk factors that might be the real cause for even these complications. So it's not independent. We don't know yet if it's independent environmental risk factors. What I found was that these risk factors that I thought was specific for schizophrenia turned out to be risk factor also for infantile autism. We found it in anorexia, especially with those girls in this case who have been born both early before week 35 and had fetal growth restriction. And we found it in ADHD and in postpartum psychosis and also bipolar disorder. So as in many research areas, you start with something and you're very sure that this is the specific. I found the specific risk factors for this specific disease. But it's very important to look at what might be the common factors among psychiatric disorders. And that's now, maybe you should say that characterizes the field of psychiatric research, that it's likely overlap over diseases in symptoms, in genetic risk factors, and in environmental risk factors. And we also see that relatives, for instance, to patients with schizophrenia more often have bipolar disorder or also infantile autism. So when I came here to Karolinska, I gained a lot by working with people in the cancer area because they had done many large register studies. So it was possible for me to use the Swedish register where you have population-based data, which means that the generalization is much better than if you have a small sample. So, and of course I've gained by working with the Swedish health register, which is a really unique source. And we have all those registers. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but we have so many registers from early life and birth to late life. And of course, the one I've been using most is the medical birth register. I also use the patient register and also something called the multi-generation register, which relate children and parents to each other. So here is some of the risk factors that we have studied for schizophrenia. The birch trees is supposed to indicate the season of birth because that's one quite small risk increase, but still it is quite well known now that in most part of the world, if you're born in early winter, I used January to April, then your risk for schizophrenia is 10% higher. Then here you can see, of course, the fetal factors here. And this is the genetic risk factors. This is paternal age and grandpaternal age. I use Fröding again here, which we recently have looked upon. I will come back to show you more details. This is congenital malformations, which increase the risk of psychiatric disorders and also immigration status. For schizophrenia, the most, maybe I should say something about the symptoms that's most important. It's hallucinations. It's that you lose the contact of reality and you may get paranoid, and it's a very painful disorder. But it's also a large variation in symptoms. I had, in our genetic research, we have had so many contacts with psychiatric patients. And one called me this week, Monday, and he said, "Oh, hi, how is research going?" "Oh, it's fine." "Yeah, congratulations to the Nature paper." I mean, we shouldn't have all those fördomar, prejudice about that schizophrenic patients are not, I mean, some of them are really fine working and in the society. But then he said, "Oh, I'm a bit puzzled because the diagnosis, that must be difficult. How did you do that in your research? How did you define schizophrenia? That must be," and he, of course, I had to agree. That's the most difficult thing we have in research, to find a group that is well defined. But in the Swedish patient register, there are about over 300,000 of admissions with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. The register started in 1973, and there is a lot of individuals, and there is also a large proportion who is admitted just once. So this is a large resource, and with this register we could also say that if you have a narrow definition that you need to be in hospital twice, the prevalence is about 0.4. You can increase it to, if you have been in hospital once, then the prevalence is about 0.6. And if you have a more spectrum diagnosis, you could have any psychotic symptoms. It's of course even larger. This is the multi-generation. So how have we used this in epidemiological research? We have, for instance, looked at fertility. This is a former doctor student of mine, where we can show that there is a reduced reproductive rate among patients with schizophrenia, and it's not compensated by an increased fertility among their healthy relatives. We have also looked at school performance. We have also a school register in Sweden, and we could show that poor school performance is predictive of future schizophrenia, with the exception of art and music, which is interesting in itself. And excellent school performance, however, is associated with the risk of bipolar disorder. So it goes in both directions. High advancing paternal age. Yeah, this is another doctor student of mine who is defending her thesis now in the end of October. And we could show that the older the man is, the more likely he is to father children who develop bipolar disorder as adults. And there were previous studies that have found an association between high paternal age and autism and also schizophrenia. And how much is the risk increase? Is this an important risk factor? So this is for bipolar disorder with an early onset. And here you can see this is the paternal age group. And this is the risk. One indicate is the reference group. And the first thing you can see that this is an increasing number here from 110 to up to, if the father is over 50, it's 281. That means almost threefold increased risk. It's a bit lower for bipolar disorder with a higher age of onset. And some of you might notice that it's not so good to be such a very young father either, but probably for other reason. We have done this in infantile autism. Here's another way to present the high paternal age data. This is another doctor student. He's called Sven Sandin. And here we try to kind of harmonize a curve where you see that it's increasing very fast from about 50 to 60. For autism, we have used the medical birth registry to look at similar risk factors for schizophrenia, but here you can see also that, for instance, malformations increase the risk of autism with about an odds ratio of 1.8. And it's not only, it's also malformation of the heart, it's genital malformation, it's also malformation in the mouth. We have also looked at paternal psychiatric disorders associated with autism. And here you can see that both fathers and mothers had an increased risk of being treated for psychiatric problems, especially schizophrenia. And mother also had an increased risk of being treated for depression. And there have been other studies after this that have followed up this in even larger materials. I said something about comorbidity, and this is a study which shows that if you look at family models and you look at who has the disease in a family tree, among siblings, among aunts, among cousins, if you have twins, then you can see that there is quite a large part of the genetic risk factors or the variation that is common with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And so this study, it came 2009, and this came in a time when we could just started to show that there seemed to be similar genetic risk factors from genetic studies. And and we can say that we now have proved this. So 2004, I decided that I should try to collect genetic samples, because environmental risk factors is very interesting, but the most interesting is, of course, if there is an interaction between environment and genetic risk factors. This is not really a recent picture, but this is from twin research, where you can see the heritability and for different psychiatric diseases, and the red is genetic variation. And you can see that many of the psychiatric disorders have a very high heritability. That means that monozygotic twins have much higher correlation in the disease than dizygotic twins. And I used to ask people, what do you think the heritability is in cancer? And most people think that the heritability is maybe 80, and in a similar range, but that's not true. The heritability is about 0.30, 0.40 in cancer. So that means that in cancer, the environmental risk factors may be more important. So it's a large advantage to do this in large material. And this is what I maybe in the title indicated, that it's a real beauty to collect so large sample based on population-based and based on patients all over the country. So, but it has been very demanding also. So you can see that we now have over 5,000 cases with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. We have started quite recently data collection in infantile autism. I have also a twin study, and most important, in genetic association studies, you need to have population-based controls, same age, same sex, but also born in the same county. And this is some of the nurses and database manager and coordinator that helped me with these collections. So I've had nurses that are traveling all over Sweden and contacting patients. And this has been quite a challenge, and there have been many obstacles on the way. I used to show this for our international collaborators in Boston, but it has been a very good way to really get large material. And this has been, I mean, this is not only my work. This is, of course, the nurses and the data collectors, but it's also a large international collaboration to get grants to do this in a large scale. So first we got this, and the first NIH grant was $4.5 million, and it's nothing left about that, because it takes, of course, a lot of money to do this type of studies, and also you need to do the analysis, and the genetic analysis. The cost for that has decreased really dramatically, but it's still very important. This is some of our results that we are quite proud of. So in 2008 we found that rare deletions and duplication in the genome increase the risk of schizophrenia. And so this is a kind of a changes in the structure. And when we started the project, I must confess that I'd never heard this about. We thought about that we could maybe replicate some of the genes that found in smaller studies that was not really of enough good quality. So we could show that some persons with schizophrenia had an increased number of unusual chromosome changes. And then 1 year after, we had another paper in Nature where we can show that it's not just the rare deletions that is important. It's also what might be a common polygenic variation, and that schizophrenia is really a polygenic disease. So this is what we have continued. And now, a couple of weeks ago, we had this large paper in Nature. Anna Keller is a postdoc in my group. And this is also in a large consortium and with many collaborators. So I need to be a bit humble here. But we found new risk genes for schizophrenia. And what's good is that if you find these genes in large material with where you can really believe that this is not false negative, you can also track what is the pathways. What does these genes mean? And from this last study, we can say that there are two determined processes were of particular importance to schizophrenia, and that's the calcium channel pathway. And it seemed to be similar in both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and also a microRNA pathway. I can't go in details, but I hope you can find the papers if you're interested. So what does this genetic research mean for the patient? Yeah, of course, it means that some of the relatives get more answer on their question about how heritable the disease is. It's open up for etiological pathways. Maybe also that we could have early contact and find those that are high risk persons. We can find biological markers, and of course I also hope that it's maybe an attitude change in society. The twins is a special issue, and I don't have much result from my twin studies, but we have taken twins identified in the Swedish twin register. We have found them, identified them all over Sweden, and they had traveled to Karolinska for 1 day, and they have got 2,000 crowns, which for many of them have been very important. Also reason to participate, and we have made MRI and fMRI in collaboration with Martin Ingvar, and we have made a cognitive testing, and we have also have CSF findings of biomarkers. This is another doctoral student of mine, Victoria Johansson. So I would like to say something about how many patients participated, wanted to donate blood, people ask me. I mean, this is, are they really interested in this? And we have about 40–45% of the patients that we contact that say yes to participate in the study. And it's about the same percent among both controls and cases. And there are studies, we need to fight, as researchers, we need to fight for this, that patients very strongly support schizophrenia research. They want to make their own judgment, decision to participate. It's very easy for, especially when you work for very severe diseases, that you, as a relative or even as a doctor, you want to patronize. You want to say, no, this research is not good for my patients. But it is related to a feeling of hope. And I found very many altruistic reasons to participate. If this helped my children, that would be fine, or if it helped anyone in the future, even if it doesn't help me. I'm sorry, this is such a short snapshot of different part of my research, but maybe I should say something that the key issues to continue with good genetic research is to have population-based data collection. We need large samples. We need geographically matched controls, and we need the international collaboration. We need to include extended family data, which we can access from the nice registers we have. We also need to try to integrate and look at the interaction with environmental exposures. So now, for instance, we are looking at, when we have all the genetic, the GWAS data and the CNV data, we can look at the pre- and perinatal risk factors from registers, we can look at cognitive function, and we can look at the interaction between these factors. So I want to acknowledge the many people involved in this, and for me, it's a very inspiring and has been a very inspiring research field. Thank you.